Yes. So we shall make a start. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Hard Talk, Gender-Based Violence Beyond Physical, hosted by the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court Association of Women Judges, ECAWJ. The ECAWJ is a nonprofit organization comprising women judges, magistrates, registrars, court administrators, among others, from the court's 9 member states and territories. ECAWJ is dedicated to, among other things, promoting gender equality in the legal profession and at a broader level engaging in public education on issues that are important to women and to the wider society. I wish to acknowledge the presence of Honorable Mr. Justice Adrian Saunders, President of the Caribbean Court of Justice, and other judges of the Caribbean Court of Justice who have joined us this evening. Her Ladyship, the Honorable Madam Justice Nadia Kangaloo, President of the Caribbean Association of Women Judges. We are delighted that you have joined us this evening. High Court judges, appellate court judges, magistrates, registrars, attorneys at law, other judicial officers, judicial research assistants, members of our sister women judges associations from the wider Caribbean, Jamaica, Guyana, Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados, Bahamas, court staff, and the members of the public who have joined us on the ECSC's YouTube channel. A warm welcome. At this time, I would invite Her Ladyship, the Honorable Madam Justice Nadia Kangaloo, President of the Caribbean Association of Women Judges, to give brief remarks. Justice Kangaloo? Sorry, Judge, you're muted, please.
There we go. All right. Thank you, Justice Fulgence, for that kind introduction. All protocols having been observed, it is a great honor for me to share a few words as President of the Caribbean Association of Women Judges. For me and for the CAWJ, this event marks a significant milestone, not only for the Eastern Caribbean Association of Women Judges, but for the entire Caribbean region, as women judges from the region have planned events to mark International Day Women Judges 2025, which will be held on Monday, March 10th, 2025. And the Eastern Caribbean Association of Women Judges has the privilege and pleasure of kicking off that calendar of events. Today, we come together for the first ever regional event hosted by the ECAWJ, the inaugural webinar entitled Hard Talk, GBV, Gender-Based Violence Beyond Physical. As we gather virtually this evening in celebration of International Day of Women Judges, we are reminded of the invaluable contributions that women judges make, not only within the courtroom, but also in shaping the legal frameworks that protect human dignity and equality across our region. This evening's discussion is a crucial one, as it addresses a pervasive issue that continues to affect millions of lives, not only in our region, but beyond: gender-based violence. However, as the title of this webinar suggests, the ECAWJ will be encouraging us to shift our focus. While we cannot overlook the physical scars of violence, we must acknowledge that the impacts of GBV extend far beyond the visible. Psychological trauma, economic abuse, and the long-term emotional consequences are just as real, just as damaging, and just as urgent to address. This conversation is particularly timely. GBV in all its forms remains a barrier to true equality and justice. It is not only a violation of human rights, but an assault on the very fabric of our society. As judges, we have a unique and powerful role to play in confronting these issues. We're entrusted with the responsibility to interpret the law with empathy and understanding, while also ensuring that our legal systems are responsive to the complex nature of GBV. It is essential that we consider not just the physical injuries that may be evident, but the invisible wounds that can last a lifetime. This webinar will provide a space for us to examine the nuances of GBV, to share insights, to challenge our current practices, and to create actionable solutions. As we move forward in this evening's discussion, I encourage all of you to engage fully, to listen deeply, and to contribute your voices to this important dialogue. In closing, I would like to express my deepest gratitude to the ECAWJ for organizing this important event. to all our distinguished speakers and participants, and to each of you for being part of this vital conversation. Together, we can ensure that GBV in all its forms is not only addressed, but eradicated from our society so that every woman, every girl, every person can live free from violence and fear. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Justice Kangalu. Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's panel discussion, as Justice Kangalu would have said, touches on a topic which is very important, one which we are all familiar with, but which requires constant discussion and education as we seek to find ways to arrest the scourge of gender-based violence in our region. I am sure that most of us can think of a story or perhaps stories of gender-based violence which have occurred in our individual islands recently. It is therefore critical that organizations such as ours seek to provide platforms to educate and share information on topics such as tonight's, as we seek to continue the discussion. Our panel discussion this evening will be moderated by Her Ladyship, the Honorable Nicola Bayer. Justice Bayer is a graduate of the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus and holds a Bachelor of Arts in History and Political Science and a Bachelor of Laws. She holds a legal education certificate from the U Wooding Law School. Justice Bayer started her career at the private bar in Grenada and after 10 years relocated to Anguilla, where she spent another 7 years. In 2013, Justice Bayer was appointed as a High Court judge of the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court and was first assigned to the territory of the Virgin Islands, where she presided over civil and criminal matters for 4 years. After the passage of Hurricane Irma in 2017, and having been successfully evacuated out of the hurricane-ravaged Tortola, Justice Bayer was assigned to St. Vincent and the Grenadines for another 4 years. In July 2022, Justice Bayer was appointed as the first judge of the newly established Family Division in the state of Antigua and Barbuda. Ladies and gentlemen, Justice Nicola Bayer, your moderator for this evening's panel discussion.
Thank you very much, Justice Fulgens. And as indicated, I wish to adopt the protocols that have already been so ably established. I wish to introduce to you our very esteemed panel that we're going to be having, fielding your questions and giving you information in relation to their specific spheres of which they deal with gender-based violence across the region. Firstly, we have Her Honor Magistrate Veronica E. Thomas, who is the presiding magistrate of the Family and Juvenile Court in Antigua and Barbuda. As the first magistrate assigned to the Family Court in Antigua and Barbuda, established as a pilot project of the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States, Magistrate Thomas has played a pivotal role in implementing legislative and administrative reforms to enhance the resolution of family disputes. In her current role, she presides over matters concerning child maintenance and access, care orders for abused, neglected, and abandoned children, criminal proceedings involving children in conflict with the law, and domestic violence cases. Her work frequently brings her into contact with vulnerable groups, including women and children, reinforcing her commitment to ensuring justice and protection for those most at risk. With a compassionate yet firm approach, Magistrate Thomas works collaboratively with legal professionals, social service agencies, and the parties involved to achieve fair and legally sound outcomes. She's a dedicated advocate for holistic, justice-driven solutions in family law and domestic violence cases. Please let us greet Magistrate Veronica Thomas. Our other panelist, the sole male on our panel, which is always very important. When we think about gender, we usually think about just being female, but we are including our males in this tonight, and it is Mr. Tyrone Buckmeyer. He has been in the social work fraternity for the past 37 years, during which time he has served in a number of different capacities, both in his native Grenada and internationally. He is currently the Director of Legal Aid and Counseling Clinic Grenada. He was also a UN Women Gender Advocate and member of the UN Women Masculinities Advisory Group. Mr. Buckmeyer is a past president of the Caribbean Male Action Network, CARIMAN, and a former board member of the Men Engage Global Alliance, MEGA. The Legal Aid and Counseling Clinic, LACC, was established by Grenada Community Development Agency, GrenCoda, in 1988. It is a multidisciplinary clinic which offers a wide range of services, including legal advice and representation, public education, mediation, and counseling, and a number of psychoeducational programs. Although the clinic offers assistance to clients with a wide range of legal and social issues, gender-based violence and juvenile justice are currently the most prevalent issues requiring their services. The clinic plays a pivotal role in assisting GBV survivors to get protection orders and follows their cases through the court system. Over the last 20 years, LACC has been the implementing agency for the Partnership for Peace program, known locally as the Man-to-Man program, which works with GBV perpetrators referred by the courts and changes an empowerment program for GBV survivors. Let us welcome Mr. Tyrone Buckmeyer. And finally, and of course not at all least, Miss Alicia Green from Tortola. Ms. Green is the founder and director of the Women in Need organization, BVI, WIN BVI. Under her leadership, WIN BVI has made remarkable strides in supporting and uplifting women in vulnerable situations, particularly survivors of domestic violence and those impacted by gender-based violence. Through advocacy, education, and direct support services, Ms. Green has pioneered a comprehensive support system that bridges social gaps, positioning the organization as a beacon of hope for the most marginalized. Alicia's, or Ms. Green's, passion for service and unwavering commitment to social change have established her as a powerful advocate in the fight against gender-based violence. As a panelist for Hard Talk GBV Beyond Physical, she will offer critical insights on the profound and far-reaching impacts of gender-based violence, reinforcing the urgent need for systemic reform and holistic solutions. Let us welcome Miss Alicia Green. The format of this evening's panel discussion would be that I will be asking the panelists a variation of questions, of some various questions. We will be fielding some questions from the participants through the chat. At the end of the presentations, we will, I believe, Justice Fulgens will open the floor to questions by persons who would then raise their hands accordingly if we have not answered their questions from the chat. So let us start, because we are trying to get as much information as possible in this 1 hour program. So let us start with Magistrate Thomas. Magistrate Thomas, since the end result usually of any of these GBV matters ends up in court, whether by force or by otherwise, is it possible, as the magistrate who presides over these matters, to give us an overview of the type of matters that are seen in terms of, are there males and females coming before the court? Are you only seeing matters filed where you're dealing with physical assault? If you can just give us an overview of the types of matters that end up coming to the court in as far as you have dealt with and engaged the court process.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Moderator, and for your kind introduction. If you'd allow me to adopt the protocol that has already been established, except to say good evening to my fellow esteemed panelists and to all the virtual attendees. Yes, we do have quite a number of applications that are filed in the family court, which is a magistrate's court. And we know the figure from the UN is that about 30% of women are victims of gender-based violence. And it is estimated that it is even higher in the Caribbean. I would say that that is borne out in the matters that come before the court, which in the main are applications that are brought by women. And we know that women are disproportionately affected by issues of gender-based violence. However, whether it is male or female, the services are available to the victims of domestic violence. And I would want to assure those victims that there is a legislative framework in place that ensures easy access to the court for their matters to be dealt with.
Would you say that they are, so when these matters are filed, would you say that there is a process in terms of everybody knows what their role and function is once these matters are filed, or even from the filing, that once the complaint has been made, is there a process then that this agency then takes up the mantle, then this agency, then it comes to court. Once the order is made, then there's another way of going. Is there that kind of process in place?
All right, so if I can take you through the process of the family court in Antigua and Barbuda, although it is not a written policy, we're very well rehearsed. So we have been doing this for a very long time, and we've become very good over time in the handling of these matters, which, as you know, are quite sensitive. So usually the matters are referred from the Gender Affairs Department. However, if someone comes to the court, they would be immediately referred to the Gender Affairs Department. At the Gender Affairs Department, they're assigned a support officer who assists with the preparation and filing of the application. In Antigua, the family court has adopted a policy where an application is heard on the same day of filing. We like to say that we do not go to sleep on an application. So once it is filed, the applicant is asked to kindly wait, and the matter is brought to the attention of the judicial officer or to my attention, and we would deal with the matter promptly. Once the matter is heard on an ex parte basis, meaning at that point the court is only hearing from the applicant and is making an order based on the affidavit evidence that is put before the court. That generally leads to the making of an interim protection order, and the interim protection order is tailored to suit the circumstances of the particular case. So in many instances, the order would prohibit the respondent from committing acts of domestic violence against the victim. It can include an order that the perpetrator be removed from the shared household and not communicate with the victim, keep a certain distance away from the victim. It can even include an order for the payment of compensation or emergency monetary relief. There is provision as well for the court to order that contact be refused to a child or to allow contact on certain terms. The order can also include that the police remove any gun, ammunition, or dangerous weapon from the respondent. So it all depends on the circumstances of the case, but very often the first hearing leads to the making of an interim protection order, which is then served by the officers of the court on the respondent with a return date when the respondent must come to the court to show cause as to why the order should not be made final. I would also like to highlight the fact that this is a completely confidential process. The court's electronic filing system allows access only to the legal representatives of the parties, the case managers, and the judicial officer assigned to the case. The hearing is also held in camera, which means in the absence of the public, it's just the judicial officer, the court clerk, and a police officer, along with the party and his or her legal representative, and a support officer is also allowed to attend. In the absence of the support officer, the court may also allow like a member of the victim's family or other means of support to attend with the victim at the hearing. The hearings may be conducted virtually, so sometimes it does not require the victim to actually come to the court, but they can stay from the office of their attorney or even the Gender Affairs Department for the hearing of the matter. And that is what follows throughout the hearing of the matter, where the hearing is conducted virtually so that the parties are not in the same room with each other. So that generally is the system we have in place at the family court in Antigua and Barbuda for the handling of domestic violence cases, which, as we know, is a subset of gender-based violence.
Thank you, Magistrate Thomas. You just now, but I will come back to that when I have spoken to the other panelists. And I want to turn now to Mr. Buckmeyer, because you've heard the structures that are usually, you've heard from Magistrate Thomas, usually the legal structures that are put in place to assist those persons who actually make the complaint and it actually gets to court. But as the director of legal aid in Grenada, is it, as in your experience of having and being involved in these matters, is it your experience that there are many matters that there's complaint of abuse, and it's not just the physical abuse, that do not reach to court?
Thank you, Justice Bayer, and I beg your indulgence to stand on the protocol already established. I want to take the opportunity to quickly say, on behalf of the Board of Directors of Legal Aid and my team, thank you for giving us an opportunity to be a part of this panel. In the main, from the majority of matters that Legal Aid and Counseling Clinic assists with, the majority of those matters are matters of physical abuse. And I think that is obviously so because physical abuse has physical manifestations that people can see, the bruising, the swelling, the broken, and damaged bodies and so forth. So that these are much more likely to elicit action. And the majority of matters that go to court are those matters that entail physical abuse. But I'm particularly pleased that this panel is focusing on beyond the physical, because a large number of the clients that we see do eventually admit to emotional abuse as well. Two main types of non-physical abuse that we see are financial abuse, where the abuser chooses to withhold the financial resources that provide support and sustenance to the family. Now, usually financial abuse is fairly easy to deal with because we're able to do, through mediation at our community mediation center, we're able to come to agreements around child support. Sometimes we come to agreements around visitation. The other set, of course, is emotional abuse, which is much more difficult to prosecute. It's much more difficult to report because a lot of persons who are being emotionally abused do not, in fact, even appreciate that they're being abused. They don't necessarily know that they're being abused because sometimes emotional abuse can be it's pervasive, but it also can be done in a very stealthy way, in a way that is not obviously apparently abusive. And persons will often put up with emotional abuse for very long periods of time before they decide that enough is enough. The other challenge in terms of victims reporting emotional abuse from our experience is the fact that you cannot point to a mark or to something that has been something that is the obvious result of emotional abuse. And so the police may not treat it as seriously as it needs to be treated. The court may not treat it as seriously as it needs to be treated. So we are happy that some focus is being brought to this type of abuse, this sort of non-physical abuse, because we believe it is much more pervasive. It has many more victims, probably, than physical abuse, and it has much more long-term effects on victims and survivors sometimes than physical abuse. Not at all to diminish the impact and the devastating repercussions of physical abuse on victims and survivors. But we've had, for example, survivors of emotional abuse who said, if you had just hit me once or twice, I wouldn't mind, because the swelling will go down. I'll get over it. But he keeps calling me these names. He keeps telling me these nasty things. He keeps describing me in such a way that makes me feel like if I am not worth anything, that I have no value. And so persons carry the impressions and the damage that happens to them as a result of emotional abuse, sometimes much longer, and do not feel that they can get help because, as I said earlier, sometimes they don't necessarily recognize that they're being abused. But even when they recognize that it is obviously abuse, they don't know if they can get help, where they can get help, and what kind of help they can ask for. And therefore, it makes it doubly difficult, doubly impacting on their lives because they're not sure that there's any support for them and that other people will understand what they're reporting on or complaining about.
So, and having said that, we were able to access a short testimony from a 62-year-old divorcee who, with 3 adult children, shared some of the impact it had on her of psychological abuse. And I just want to read what she said that her experience was, and if that is something that resonates with you in terms of what you see coming into the clinic. The husband created an environment of emotional dependency as a means of control. There were numerous extramarital affairs, and so the wife took on the disappointment and public embarrassment which ensued. It took a tremendous mental toll. Had to tolerate drug use within the home out of fear of standing up against it, leading to a risk of law enforcement intervention, devastating the family, affecting their livelihoods. Threats of that if the behavior that was exhibited by the partner or the husband was not tolerated, then he would abandon the family, creating a means of tempering any kind of reactions to anything that may have been happening in the home. This one I found was I was a little taken aback by this, but I'm sure that there are men who do this deliberately displaying in the home photographs of the mistress intending to belittle the wife, leaving other evidence of infidelity lying around the house. And I don't even want to think what that could possibly have been. Disappearing for extended periods without communication, resulting in many nights of driving around town searching for the husband. That scenario of what this woman, who eventually through lots of support was able to get herself out of the situation in terms of filing for divorce and finally taking those steps. But is that what you would say is typical of non-physical violence that you would see? And I'm using the word violence because that has to be certainly violence to the brain, violence to the mind, violence to the psyche, that you see that you were speaking about, that is not can't be pinpointed and can't be necessarily directed to the court for the court to then understand what exactly is happening. Is that the kind of thing that you're speaking about?
Absolutely. It resonates very deeply because it is a story that is repeated so many thousands of times, right? Because we have to understand that people who use non-physical violence, they're actually quite sophisticated. They're very well-mannered in the way that they perpetrate the abuse, right? They understand that they have the power to hurt persons on a level that a slap or a physical a lash may not be able to hurt them. And many times the psychological abuse is meant to break the spirit of the victim. And many times it is meant to say, you are not worthy, you're not enough. You don't say, I have left you to get somebody else who looks better, and I can bring this imagery into our home to make you realize that I don't think you're worth anything. And when somebody is subjected to this kind of abuse over a period of time, it gets to the point where the victim is questioning her very value as a human being, her very worth as to, am I a good mother? Can I possibly be a good mother? Can I possibly be a good mother if the man for whom I have borne children thinks of me in such a derogatory way? If he thinks of me and he uses such humiliating language towards me, how good can I possibly be? So it creates a lot of self-doubt that will have long-term ramifications in terms of the emotional health of these persons who are victimized in such a way. And we need to find ways for the court in a more deliberate way to be able to recognize the impact of this sort of psychological abuse and find ways to address it in a way that is, I would even go so far as in a way that is punitive, so that persons understand that it is just not okay to attempt to destroy somebody's sense of being and value and self-worth. So we have to do that work over time, because if we don't, we are going to see a lot of persons come to court with physical manifestations of abuse, but there are many more persons who are walking around who are damaged and in danger of being irrevocably damaged as a result of psychological abuse.
Thank you for that, Mr. Buckmeyer. And just in terms of getting a sense, you did say that most of the persons who come to the clinic and start the process do continue probably to the conclusion of the matter. But in those few instances, perhaps where you do not have a client has decided halfway through the process for whatever reason, that I no longer want to proceed with this matter. What is that usually the rationale or the indication that would be given by the client to you as to the reasons why? Is it anything to do with the court process itself, or is it something more on the personal? What is usually, if they decide not to proceed, what is usually the reasons given?
It's a myriad of things, Judge. One of them is just survival of the family. In so many cases, the abused person feels that if I speak out, if I seek help, my family will lose out, because the abuser tells them that that's part of the threat. That if you dare to speak out or to complain or to report, I will withhold my financial support. I will withhold my emotional support. I will withhold my physical presence. Another issue for many survivors is the fact that their parents or their significant other persons in their lives tell them not to report. So many persons say, well, he's not even beating you up, he's not beating you. You still have food on the table, your rent is still paid, the family is still good. Why would you break up that just because somebody says something about you that you don't like? So sometimes people are not encouraged to report. And there is, of course, the instance where they do not necessarily feel that the system will understand and react to them in an appropriate way, and they will find the services and support that they need. And sometimes it's easier to take the path of least resistance. We have the unfortunate saying in the Caribbean, certainly in Grenada, and I'm sure in other countries of the region, you know the devil you have, you don't know what you're going to get.
No, can get.
The man bad, but he probably not the worst. So maybe stay with him and grin and bear it, These are some of the unfortunate advice that we give to persons that victims often hear, that sort of forces them into inaction.
Thank you for that, Mr. Buckmeyer. Ms. Green, having heard now both Mr. Buckmeyer and the magistrate, and I kind of left you because I want you to hear this, because what I need you to give us is what is in terms of the role that WIN BVI plays in this kind of scenarios that you have heard from both Mr. Buckmeyer and Magistrate Thomas insofar, and first and foremost, is it only women that you assist?
Thank you for that. And I do also want to first recognize the protocol that has been established. And it's indeed an honor for me to sit on this panel to discuss this very important topic. I personally believe that we do need to be talking about domestic violence more, this whole gender abuse more. We didn't used to before, but I'm happy to see where we are now in 2025. We're doing more of it, but together we can do more. Now, yes, listening to the other two presenters definitely spilled into what I had planned to discuss and share on the panel this evening. But I want to, instead of rehashing some of what, for example, Director Buckmore said in terms of, the emotional and psychological, from where I sit for WIN BVI, it's the long-lasting trauma, not only for the survivors, but the children, and sometimes people in the community who witness these things. It's the trauma is what we need to deal with because those scars are more damaging than the physical. And it impacts a woman's sense of self-worth, her ability to trust people, and even her capacity to heal. So, no matter what program or counseling she may be involved with, if they continue to be exposed, then you wouldn't see any type of healing happening. And then that trauma carries on from generation to generation. And so, when we see persons acting a certain way, it's not necessarily that that is who that person is. It's because they have scars and they have trauma wounds that they have not dealt with. So what WIN BVI is poised to do is focus on just that piece, while all the legal process and all of that is taking place, and they are waiting. Some of these people are still in the environment of the abuser. And from where I sit also, we see a lot of behaviors that are rooted in narcissism passed down to the children. So your children become narcissistic and there's that abuse, all over again. And so for WIN, we've actually crafted a couple of programs that I'm hoping, if it doesn't exist in the other Caribbean countries, that they will also adopt these basic things. And we're a small group of committed individuals to empowering women in their own space, wherever they are. For the same reasons, they don't feel as if they're good enough. They don't feel like they can stand on their own 2 feet when we have the financial abuse. But one of the things we try to do is counteract that. So we have a parenting program that we've put in place, that we meet physically, creating a safe space with these persons to discuss certain things to help them along. One of the things we pride ourselves on is our mentorship program, because while other nonprofits may have systems in place to, and I'm going to say patch because there may be some need at the time. Persons need a mentor that would help them with support through the legal process, depending on how long it is, help them to be accountable for their own healing if they have to go to counseling, if they have to do X, Y, and Z. That mentor is there to walk them through and to support them to be a better version of themselves, to be more confident. And that is one of the biggest service that we provide to the clients that come to us while they're going through all of this. I've seen instances where, and again, especially after when we had COVID in 2020? Yes. We provided so much emotional support to people, especially with all this lockdown. And that is when we saw our domestic violence numbers skyrocket. Because you can imagine, we're out to work all day, but here now we're stuck in a house all day. And so this is not a custom. So then, you end up, feeling a little, having these situations happen in the home with the families, etc. And we provided a lot of emotional support to those persons, whether by phone because we couldn't go out. And that is really how our services became more relevant to people in the community.
So can I just ask, so your organization really is that support mechanism that works along with whether it's starting the legal process, once it's started, so as Magistrate Thomas was speaking about the support person, I think that was the reference that she made in terms of having that person in court. So would you then actually go to court with the individual when the court matters are being called, and that they're there in court with them in terms of, holding their hand if it has to be that, etc.? Is that the kind of service that you're like filling the breach?
We would definitely, that's exactly. And I wanted to also add, outside of our face-to-face program, because we recognize that there is a need, well, I would say globally, we do have an online program that teaches how to deal with narcissism. And it's open, this particular one is open to women. But because, I mean, the statistics show that women are really the most traumatized from these types of situations. And so it's an online program that meets once a week, again, to provide them with tools to deal with these situations. And just to add a little bit more on top of that, we've had to support women emotionally as far as St. Vincent. And I've been asking, is there such a group or a place where you can go, feel safe, have someone to hold your hand through all of this? And although there are church groups, people are still reluctant to do that, again, for they would say they don't want their business confidentiality.
Yes.
But sometimes, like we say, if you knock on our door, there's two things you leave outside: shame and judgment. We don't do that. The mere fact that you're coming here is because you want help, right? And so we try to build a trust and confidence so that we can then be that advocate for them. If they need stuff that we don't have, then we've built relationships with, for example, the social development, with the family support network, and other nonprofits that would help us to provide a holistic program to help them to heal.
So do you only, and so that the question that I had asked in the beginning, so is it only, sorry, women that you support, or is it, and do you find that actually any men turn up at your door knowing that this is WIN BVI?
And the answer to that is yes. And the reason why we had to agree is because we recognize that we're empowering the women and the children, but there's also a dad at home who is not being fed the type of information they're being fed. So you'll have a situation where you have this strong woman and the man's feeling like, hey, I'm over here, kind of thing. So we do support men who are brave enough to come and say, I need support.
Okay. And so from your perspective, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, if when we are doing our assessments, especially with the males, we realize that they need more than WIN can provide for them, then we do have an affiliate male-dominated organization that we would refer them to so that they can have that male mentor.
Right. So from your perspective, which is kind of like an overview of these victims who are now going through the process from the start of having the strength to make the report, etc. Do you then also establish ties with other stakeholders, and how do you find that they are operating? I mean, I think we shared with you that case out of Trinidad, the Talk-GBV, which I think all of us have now read with some degree of absolute, sadness that this could have happened. And it felt like if the entire structure that was in place had failed this woman. I mean, I'm sure that's not the only issue, but it's certainly one that the court took on. Do you find that and I guess you can only really speak for Tortola, but do you find that in Tortola specifically that you have found that the stakeholders in this entire process are working together to really try and, I don't know, can you say eradicate, but certainly lessen the impact of GBV?
And the answer to that is really yes. Because of the types of cases that we were being called to, noting that we are not experts, we've had to form relationship with the police department. We have an officer that we have on call. We can speak with him or say, this is happening. Can you step in, get your police department to be a part of this? And then we have other people may need some legal support. So we form relationships with a couple of lawyers that are willing to do pro bono work to help these cases. And then we do have a relationship with other key stakeholders along the way. Again, noting we are not experts, we're just trying to assist and help with the process and the situation. So we've even had cases where the High Court would have referred persons to us for that aftermath healing process as well.
Okay, that sounds good. I just want to check in with our chairman.
Yes.
To see if there are any
Justice Barry,
questions.
we have two questions from Justice Pemberton. One is, how are the ex parte hearings conducted or appointments conducted? And she wants to know, do you ask questions at that appointment? I'm assuming.
Yes, thank you very much for that question. The ex parte hearings are conducted, it can be conducted in person as well as virtually. And what we are looking at is the application and the affidavit evidence that would have been submitted by the applicant. The court is also able to take oral evidence, so I am able to ask questions, seek clarification, get further information. Once I do that, I have to record the oral questions and answers, and that is served along with the application and affidavit evidence on the respondent. I hope that answers the question.
So that so I wanted to just do a follow-up, unless there's another question was in the
There
chat.
is another one. There is another question, but if it's a follow-up on this one, we can.
Yes. So in relation, because when you are starting the ex parte process, I would assume that the support officer is there from that time frame. What my question was, is that support officer specially trained for that purpose? Do they have any special training in that regard?
I believe that they do. They are officers within the Gender Affairs Department specifically designated as support officers. And I find that the persons who access those services, when they come to the court, they're usually very well prepared to deal with the process of prosecuting their application before the court.
Okay. Yes, Justice Fulgent?
Well, I guess this is a follow-up to that. Can you expand on the role of the Gender Affairs Department in the court process? If it's beyond just the support officer, perhaps you can let us know.
That is their main function in terms of their interaction with the justice system. But apart from that, I'm aware they offer counseling services. They may also seek to assist members of the family of the victims to offer additional support to the applicants who come before the court, but their main interaction with the court is in the form of offering support and assistance with the preparation of the documents to be filed in support of the application.
So is that, so like, and I'm speaking from my own experience in terms of Tortola, where I sat and I did some of these matters. are they then the body that would actually prepare the documents, the court documents that are filed in court?
Yes, yes, they
Yes,
do.
okay, okay, okay.
All right. Just before we continue, if we just can take one other question from Chief Justice George. Is there a high attrition rate in the court cases, and how are these dealt with?
Well, my observation has been, as mentioned before, that the matters processed through the Gender Affairs Department, they generally well prepared. The applicants are well prepared in the form of the counseling and the other support services that are offered. So you generally find that they do stay the course through the entire process.
And do you have repeat offenders?
I have had one or two, not generally speaking. I don't see that very often, right?
Okay.
But we really don't have a high rate of attrition.
Okay. Okay. Yes, Justice Fulgens, was there any other questions that were being fielded in the chat?
We just have a comment, not a question.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to raise with Mr. Buckmeyer because he seemed to suggest that certainly the court system should be more readily or be more ready to understand and accept the non-physical aspect of this GBV. And of course, do you have a specific recommendation that as court officers who deal with these matters, do you think that we should be specially trained to recognize this, have more specialist training in relation to that? What is your recommendation in terms of assisting the court in dealing with these non-physical aspects of things?
Certainly, the training will make a big difference, Judge. I believe that if there's more training and sensitivity to both the pervasiveness and the impact of psychological abuse and violence, that the courts can more actively address these matters in terms of the final outcome of a matter. But even before the matters come to court, we believe that there should be more training provided for persons, such as in the Gender-Based Violence Unit, which is what we call it in Grenada, at the Special Victims Unit, which is in our division, a department within our police, Royal Grenada Police Services, to understand that this is real violence as well. Because sometimes victims are told, don't worry about that, don't say that, don't put that in the statement because the magistrate wouldn't understand what you mean. If the man is threatening you, doing threatening things. So, for example, we had a situation where a perpetrator never actually raised his hand or used a weapon on his partner, but he spent a lot of time sharpening a cutlass. So every time he got upset or he felt the woman, quote unquote, stepped out of line, he picked up his cutlass and he meticulously sharpened it in her presence. That is emotional violence because he's suggesting to her, there will come a day when I'm going
And
to
I will use this.
on you, right?
Yeah.
But sometimes because the persons who are assisting with filling out the statements and the affidavit that are to go before the magistrate in seeking a protection order do not give the same weight to non-physical violence as it do to violence, it doesn't necessarily make its way to the court. If it does make its way to the court, then the judges and magistrates will be able to, hopefully, will have the necessary training and sensitivity to give it the way that it deserves and reflect some sort of, in their final decision, reflect some sort of punishment. Because let's face it, a lot of the persons who perpetrate non-physical violence, they do it for many, many years. They get away with it because they're doing it almost secure in the knowledge that the victim is not likely to report, because the victim is not likely to be understood and the victim is not likely to be taken seriously. So they do it even over a longer period than some physical violence. Sometimes a person lashes out and he may lash out once or twice, but once he does it and he faces an immediate consequence or he faces a consequence, he stops. Sometimes perpetrators of psychological violence are even in the very courtroom while the matter is being heard, continuing to intimidate and
Yeah.
exhibit signs of psychological violence against the perpetrator. So I certainly believe training will make a difference. I think we need to also, when we developing special operating procedures and other documentation and guidelines that support the system, we need to begin to recognize what, or to at least acknowledge what psychological violence looks like, what the impacts can be on perpetrators, how it might, on victims, how it might affect their ability to report and seek justice, and create ways and suggest ways of actually dispensing justice in relation to those matters.
Thank you, Mr. Buckmeyer. Justice Fulgence?
Yes, so we have a comment and a question. Marissa Robson, I believe. I think the idea of same-day hearings, as well as the fact that the police refer matter to gender affairs in terms of the victims, do they have to pay any fees? That's the question. And one of the most restricting factors to the courts for victims in St. Kitts and Nevis is financial. More often than not, a report is lodged, and the police always refer victims to lawyers. This is usually a turnoff for many, especially when the situation requires immediate attention.
So, Magistrate Thomas, are you aware of a fee attached to the filing of matters?
There is no fee for the filing of an application for protection order. There's no fee. And as I mentioned before, I find very often the victims who come through the Gender Affairs Department, they are so much better prepared than the ones who go through their attorneys, because you do need, there is an emotional aspect, a psychological aspect, and you have to steel yourself. You have to fortify yourself for the process that has to take its course. The initial part of it is fairly easy. You come, ex parte hearing, but the matter continues from there. And very often, if you are not prepared emotionally and psychologically, it can be a daunting experience. And so sometimes I do have to ask the applicants who come through their private attorneys to seek counseling services through the Gender Affairs Department to assist them, to take them through the process.
Okay.
We have another question.
Yes, I was just going ahead. I was just going to
Right.
say that.
So this question is for Mr. Buckmeyer from Justice Pemberton. How would you suggest that the court deals with the perpetrators?
That the court recognizes them for the perpetrators, I'm almost tempted to say criminals that they are, because in truth, as I said, more often than not, their cycle of abuse is longer. Their methods of abuse are more devastating in the long term. If the victim survives and the victim is dealing with the emotional ramifications of having to question herself and her worth and her value as a mother, as a wife, as a care provider, and so forth. So we have, I think, in the OECS, we have good legislation that deals with domestic violence and gender-based violence issues at the court, and a good suite of punishments, of penalties. So I feel we're equipped already to dispense justice, and sometimes harsh justice, but what we need more than anything before we get to dispensing appropriate justice is to ensure that the issues of psychological abuse are recognized and given the weight that they deserve.
Okay. We have a comment. Sometimes the perpetrators convince themselves that if it's not physical, then they haven't done anything punishable by law.
Absolutely. And in fact, they convince the victim that they're not being abused, because the law is not necessarily stepping in, because there's not an identifiable mark that was left on the physical body. So they give themselves this impression that I'm not doing anything wrong. And why are you complaining? I'm not doing anything wrong. What if it was somebody who was beating you up? And I've heard sometimes where, again, supporters, family members say, at least he's not hitting you. What if it was somebody else who was beating you up? What if you leave him and you end up with somebody who's beating you up? So I feel that the perpetrators of psychological violence are more sophisticated in the use of that violence, and they do it over a longer period of time. And unfortunately, they get away with it more often than not.
Right. I have a very interesting question. Do we get cases of violence by children against parents? And if so, how does the system handle those?
Is that my
We have
question?
had some cases here in Grenada where
Yeah.
juveniles would have attacked their parents or hit their parents, abuse their parents in anger or as a result of not getting something they demanded, and so on. And many times those matters are handled on Family Day and within the context of the juvenile justice legislation. So I'm sure it's handled differently than a normal criminal offense that is done in the open court. At least so from my experience in Grenada, yes, we have had, and they have been dealt with in the juvenile court or family court, and sometimes they have been punished through being remanded to a residential facility or other types of censure.
Just Magistrate Thomas, do you have that experience as well?
I'm not from the point of view of seeking a protection order, but as Mr. Buckmeyer said, certainly those cases will come through the criminal justice system and the provisions of the Child Justice Act would apply. And so there's a process where the matter might end up before the Child Justice Board, and attempts are made to see whether diversion would be an appropriate way of dealing with the matter.
I see.
So,
Justice Fulgence, I see, keeping an eye on the time. I'm not
yes, I
sure.
am. So we have about just about maybe 5 minutes or so. I have 2 questions, and perhaps if anyone wants to ask a question, a burning question, we'd invite you to. But I'll just take 2. Women have expressed fear that the protection, sorry, that the protection orders will enrage their partner and cause their partner to hurt them. And even though there is a punishment attached to breaching the protection order, by the time law enforcement gets involved, the woman may be severely injured or even dead. How is this handled in Antigua and Barbuda?
Well, that's certainly one of the gaps I think we have in our system, where we do not have safe houses. And there are situations where I think it would be appropriate that during the process of applying for the protection order, that there is some place of refuge for the victim while the process takes its course. So I would certainly wish to identify that as a gap and something that we would need to work towards addressing.
Perhaps Ms. Green can indicate, does that exist in Tortola, that kind of facility?
What I would say is most of our matters are really dealt with at the High Court. And if there's a violation, then sometimes it's referred to the magistrate court, but more than likely it is handled at the High Court. And I know for a fact that if we have any breaches, the police department that is responsible for that particular area, those matters are definitely on top of the cases.
Are there safe houses available for persons to go to in Tortola in the event of something occurring?
Well, that is definitely a gap that we have, but we do have places where we position persons. We would call them safe houses, but there's no one place.
Okay.
Because even for when we have had to secure some persons as well in an environment where no one would be able to find them, not even the perpetrator. But once
Yes.
that has been breached, then we're no longer able to use those spaces. So,
Correct.
but we don't
Okay.
have a central facility per se, like how other jurisdictions would have to do that as
Okay.
yet.
As yet. Justice Fulgens?
All right, I think we have two more. It appears that gender-based violence has deep-seated cultural roots. Magistrate Thomas, this question is for you. Do you think that there should be more community interaction to sensitize persons?
Most definitely, I would agree with that statement. There needs to be a multifaceted approach. It's not just the response from the justice system, but social services, the criminal justice system. Everyone needs to collaborate because of the nature of domestic violence. It really requires a multifaceted approach. And so I would definitely agree with that statement. And we do need to do more work to educate, enlighten persons in terms of the nature of domestic violence, the point that Mr. Buckman made about it's not just the physical aspects of it, educate persons as to the options that are available to them to seek redress. I would also like to see more programs catered to the perpetrators of domestic violence because in my view, if you are just assisting the victims, that's just treating the symptom, but not the cause. And so we have to really take a more holistic approach to addressing this issue.
Yes, Ms. Green, you wanted to add to that?
I actually like that question a lot, and that is actually one of the things that WIN BVI is leading on with one of our partner organizations, Unite BVI, where we started a gender-based campaign. I think it was late last year. It was specifically leading up to the 17 days of activism, but we decided that this particular topic is so important, is going to be a year-round campaign where we would be bringing awareness to specific target audiences from children to males to females to couples to partners. We've actually done a few video recordings and posted them on our social media pages already, and I do have one of my members who's very keen and is leading the charge in this area. So it may be something that again we can share to make sure it happens in the region to bring more awareness and sensitize persons to the gender-based violence campaigns.
Thank you.
So
Justice Fulgens, I think the last
that's the
question
last
is,
question. Yes.
yes.
So it's a comment and question in one. All too often we attend these events and we are enlightened by hearing what transpires and the efforts that go into the process and procedures and eventual implementation and the outcomes. We are attuned to hearing about the female victims. Yet I feel in a Caribbean community society, the culture is as such that the male victims and survivors of gender-based violence are not given the same respect and compassion as their female counterparts. I was very relieved today and happy to hear from BVI, from Ms. Green, who actually informed that the practice of inclusivity for men, there's a practice of inclusivity for men in society. All too often, the shame and embarrassment associated with gender-based violence relating to men in the Caribbean community has prevented these particular victims from coming forward, and they are left to suffer in silence. And someone else has said that they had a case where the husband literally had to hide and disguise himself when visiting the law office, as he was afraid to make the report to the police for fear of being ridiculed. Yes, so.
So I just wanted to say thank you for those comments for sure. And before we end this I think we cannot say enough informative session this evening, I wanted to just share with the audience, the target audience, that there are in fact documents that exist that can assist in setting very standardized manner in which these GBV matters are dealt with, and not just domestic violence. We're talking about all GBV matters, including sexual offenses and all of those matters that are also criminal in nature. And I'm asking Justice Fulgens if she can just share very briefly on her screen 2 documents that I was able to source for this matter, which was the national policy that was exists for BVI. Oh, sorry, this is the one for the National Standard Operating Procedures for Grenada-based violence, gender-based violence for Grenada. This was created by Jacqueline Seeley-Burke and 2 other consultants for PAHO. I'm just sharing it. I was informed that if anyone who deals with these matters in the court system wishes to have access to this document, it is freely available, and of course, for adaptation in your jurisdiction if you wish. The other document, this was done in 2020. The other document, Justice Fulgens, do you have that as well?
Yes. I'm trying to make sure that I find it. Just give me 1 second, please. Yes, it's coming right up.
Okay.
Yes.
And this is the, yes, and then this is a document that was specifically for domestic violence protocol in the British Virgin Islands. It's a little bit more focused than the SOP that I shared with you earlier, insofar that this dealt with specifically with national domestic violence. Again, though, bringing together all the stakeholders and what their roles and function are from the reporting of a matter to the conclusion of a matter before the court, and what support systems are available. Again, it is available and can be accessed if anyone wishes to see it and see if it's something that can be utilized in your respective jurisdictions. And that, I believe, is all that I need to say.
Yes, thank you, Justice Bayo, and thank you. Thank you so very much, everyone, this evening. We have some other questions in the chat. Obviously, as you can tell, this is a continuing conversation, and we will have to do a part 2. I'm sure many people want to hear a lot more from our panelists, especially Ms. Green and Mr. Buckmeyer, who brought a different perspective, I think, tonight to the topic. So at this point, I'd call on Justice Tamara Gill to do our vote of thanks.
Thank you, Justice Fulgens. After such an insightful and thought-provoking discussion, it is my honor to deliver the vote of thanks on behalf of the Eastern Caribbean Association of Women Judges. We extend our deepest gratitude to all those who made this event possible. For taking the time to attend, we thank Mr. Justice Adrian Saunders, President of the Caribbean Court of Justice. We are honored to have you grace us with your presence, sir. We are grateful to President Justice Nadia Kangaloo and the executive of our umbrella association, the Caribbean Association of Women Judges, for calling us to action by inviting us to be part of activities to mark International Day of Women Judges 2025, and for providing invaluable assistance in promoting and encouraging the participation of members. We say a huge thank you to our accomplished moderator, Her Ladyship, the Honorable Madam Justice Nicola Bayer, one of our members, who most ably took us through the discussion with her expertise as judge of the Antigua Family Court. Notwithstanding her hectic schedule, which this month includes a stint or 2 acting on our Court of Appeal bench, Justice Bayer readily agreed to take on this role. We appreciate and applaud her for her passion and dedication to the cause. We thank our exceptional panelists for their willingness to participate in the panel discussion and sharing the various perspectives on the complexities of gender-based violence with an emphasis on mental and emotional abuse. Thanks to my sister of many years, Her Honor Veronica Thomas, Magistrate of the Family and Juvenile Court, Antigua and Barbuda, for her significant contribution to the discussion. As a former magistrate dealing with cases of domestic violence almost on a daily basis, I truly appreciated her Honor's perspective. Thanks to Mr. Tyrone Buckmeyer, Director of the Legal Aid and Counseling Clinic of Grenada. As a magistrate in Grenada, I worked closely with Mr. Buckmeyer and can attest that he is the real deal in the fight against domestic violence. He always brings a wealth of knowledge and experience in his presentations, and he was true to form this evening. Thanks to Ms. Alicia Green, founder and director of Women in Need in the British Virgin Islands, WIN-BVI, a pioneer and a giant in supporting victims of gender-based violence, which certainly came out this evening. Thank you so much, Ms. Green. A special and profound thank you goes out to the courageous woman who allowed her experiences to be shared with us, detailing the mental torment she endured. Ma'am, please know that we understand and respect your decision to remain anonymous. We hope that you can find comfort in the words of Maya Angelou, a great woman who endured adversity herself. And I quote from her, "You may encounter many defeats, but you must not be defeated. In fact, it may be necessary to encounter defeats so you can know who you are, what you can rise from, or you can still come out of it," unquote. For supporting this activity, we thank the judges of our Court of Appeal, High Court judges, magistrates, registrars, and judicial research assistants. We value the special support of members of our sister judges associations across the region, Women in Justice and Women for Justice. For her assistance in providing invaluable information for the discussion, we thank attorney Mrs. Esther Green-Ernest of St. Lucia. For their assistance with the technical aspects for the discussion, we thank Mr. Mark Ernest, Information Technology Manager, and Ms. Rejeanne Montout, Website Content Officer of Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court. I thank my fellow executive members of the Eastern Caribbean Association of Women Judges, including Justice of Appeal Margaret Price Finley, Justice Agnes Acti, Justice Angelica Tilok Singh, Acting Justice Sibel Sanagdantis, and Her Honor Nayo Emmanuel, for the part they played in putting this activity together. We must single out our leader, our esteemed inaugural President, Justice Kimberly Sanak-Fulgens, for her tireless efforts to ensure that the Eastern Caribbean Association of Women Judges was well represented in the slate of events organized for International Day of Women Judges celebrations. Like Justice Bayer, Justice Sanak-Fulgens is engaged in an acting capacity on our Court of Appeal. Finally, we thank you, the rest of our distinguished audience, including attorneys, stakeholders, and members of the public joining on the Eastern Caribbean Supreme Court's YouTube channel, for your presence and support, demonstrating a collective commitment to address the disturbing issue of gender-based violence. Special thanks to our Zoom audience for your questions and comments. Let us accelerate action in spreading awareness as we continue to strive to curb the scourge of gender-based violence in our region. This brings our panel discussion to an end. Thanks, everyone, and happy International Day of Women Judges and happy International Women's Day.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Have a good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Thank you. Bye.